other than that, we are moving into our next presentation, Andréannne Langevin. You have 15 minutes and then 5 minutes questions after that. So go ahead.
Merci. Bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Andréannne Langevin, je vous parle de l'Université McGill située sur le territoire Haudenosaunee et Anishinaabeg. I decided to do my presentation in English today. So it's going to be a presentation of preliminary results of a 4-month focus group study with 44 Quebec parents, sharing their opinions and experiences on language policy in Quebec and how it affects their children's school experience. I'll go over a brief history of the policy, then into my sampling participants from my research, and then I'll finish with some of the preliminary results from my work. All right, so Quebec language policies are the result of roughly 200 years of repression of the poor, uneducated Francophone population by the British elite living on the territory and owning the majority of financial assets in the province. In the past, English was the more desirable language in Quebec. Bosses and foremen made this explicitly clear by telling Francophones to, quote, speak white or speak English in the workplace. In the 1950s, the Quiet Revolution in Quebec, with its powerful slogan, Maître chez nous, or masters in our own house, represented national pride and promoted French as the language of government, business, and public life. Demographically speaking, the Quiet Revolution happened at a critical time in the province. The fertility rate had dropped to unprecedented lows, and the government had to turn to immigration to sustain demographic growth. But many newcomers adopted English over French for socioeconomic reasons. To reverse this trend, Bill 101 was enacted in 1977. This piece of legislation protects the French language through a set of policies controlling language use in education, as well as in public and private organization. My research focuses on the educational provisions of Bill 101. So what is Bill 101 in education? In essence, Bill 101 requires mandatory French instruction from kindergarten to grade 11 in all school subjects, aside from second language classes. In Quebec, there are no English immersion programs part of the public system. English schools do exist here, however, children must be eligible. A minority of students in Quebec qualify to attend English school. Oftentimes, they are eligible because at least one of their parents received English instruction in Canada, and this parent is given what we call a certificate of eligibility, which is passed down from generation to generation and allows them to go to an English school. To bypass Bill 101, some ineligible Quebec parents send their children to a private, unsubsidized school, and there they find the pedagogical freedom in terms of language of instruction, and many of those parents seek a bilingual program. Of course, this choice is only available to families of substantial means. And I would like to mention that Bill 101 remains virtually unchanged since its ratification over 44 years ago. Okay, why am I interested in educational language policies as a researcher? Well, first and foremost, I became interested in this topic as a mom. The researcher piece came later. This is a picture of a busy park, and if you come and spend some time on Quebec playgrounds, you'll notice that the topic of language and education is recurrent. In my neighborhood park in Montreal, you can overhear conversations between a great variety of parents, Canadians, immigrants, Anglophones, Francophones, parents who are eligible, ineligible to English instruction, and you can hear them share their opinions on Bill 101 and how it affects their children's experience in school. So I became interested in what I call park talk and grounding my work in stakeholder theory and public policy, I started to think about how I could turn those everyday conversations into research data. Sorry, I see someone wrote on my slide and I don't know how to erase it. Thank you. So stakeholder theory. Stakeholders are individuals that affect or are affected by the accomplishment of an organization. Stakeholder theory argues that stakeholders should be included in the decision-making process proportionally to the stake they have in an organization. And stakeholder theory is commonly used in economics when talking about the private enterprise, but it can also be connected to public policy theory, which acknowledges that people served by a policy are its stakeholders. In Quebec, parents are significant stakeholders of educational language policies because Bill 101 affects them through their children's school experience. The goal of my research project is to assess whether their opinions on Bill 101 and language education are represented in the public policy. So I set out to find stakeholders willing to participate, and I found 44 parents who answered the call and volunteered. I asked the participants how they self-identified in terms of three variables, so where they lived, their place of birth, and eligibility. These are based on common categories of parents described in the Quebec literature connected to language policy. 20 parents in this study group lived in a region outside of the Greater Montreal, and 24 resided inside the Greater Montreal. 29 participants were born in Canada, and 15 were first-generation immigrants born outside of Canada. And although I use the label immigrant to represent their place of birth, which impacts legal status under Bill 101, I would like to acknowledge that some of these participants labeled as immigrants had been living in Canada for actually quite a while, and they are Canadian citizens of migrant background. The third variable considered for the sample selection is eligibility status. So 16 parents in the study held a certificate of eligibility, and 28 parents were ineligible for English instruction, and so were their children. All right, so what did I do with those participants? Well, I grouped them. I tried to group them in groups as homogeneous as possible. I had 13 different focus groups. To give you an example of what those could look like, so on the left-hand side, it would be a group of 3 parents ineligible for English instruction in Quebec, of migrant background, and living inside Montreal. And I asked all the groups questions related to their opinions and experiences with language policy in Quebec. Today, I decided to share 2 themes that emerged out of those discussions with sub-themes. Let's look at the first theme of control. So I asked my participants to give themselves a score out of 10. I asked them to grade the level of control they feel over choosing a language of instruction for their children. If we look at the ineligible population, a representative quote would be this one from a father who was not eligible for English instruction. He says, "In my case, I have 0 control. My kids go to the neighborhood public French school. I do not know their English teacher. They watch YouTube and Netflix to learn English." So unsurprisingly, in general, the ineligible population have no choice, and they are aware of this. So they've scored themselves a 0 out of 10. In some cases, and that's why my average is 0.5, some parents are bumping their scores to a 1, a 2, and even sometimes a 3, because those parents are of means and they acknowledge their financial privilege in having the possibility to send their child to a private bilingual school or English immersion school. In terms of the eligible parents, a quote that would be representative is this one. This mom, she says, "I am a 10 out of 10 for control. I do think we have an advantage in having the opportunity to send our kids to any school. My children go to French immersion and they learn English at home, so they're bilingual. In wanting to preserve French, lawmakers just made Anglophones more fortunate." Usually the participants who were eligible were also historical Anglophones from the province. Um, the great majority of eligible parents gave themselves a 10 out of 10, but this result, the average of this result is a little bit affected by the variable of where the parents live. So that's why the average is not a 10 out of 10. It's a little bit lower than that. And let's look at this sub-theme. So the sub-theme of access to an English school, and this is affected by where the parents who are eligible live. So parents living outside of the Montreal area are having a difficult time accessing English school. This mother says, "My children go to a Francophone school because the English school is too far. There are more students in the French school." This mother from the Magdalen Islands, she says, "The only English school on the Magdalen Islands has 34 students from pre-kindergarten to secondary 5. We are desperate for more students." So some eligible parents in Quebec, even though they could send their children to an English school, end up choosing a French school for convenience because the French school is closer, and also for socialization, because there's not enough kids their children's age to socialize with at school. So they choose the bigger school, even though they know that in the French public sector, the children might have as little as 45 minutes of English second language per week as part of their curriculum. In contrast, this mother from the Montreal area acknowledges that she qualifies for 3 English elementary schools, 2 French elementary schools. They're all walking distance, and she feels pretty fortunate. The second theme I'll share with you is the theme of change. So I asked my participants whether they were satisfied with Bill 101 as is, or if they would like to change it if they could. And overall, my participants said in 91% of the cases, yes, we would like to change it. But this percentage is pretty meaningless. I think we have to divide it into variables to understand it better. So parents of migrant background, they said yes in 100% of cases. I don't have a single one of my participants who self-identified as being from migrant background who said, no, we're happy with Bill 101 as it is. In terms of the eligible Canadians, most of them in the vast majority said yes, but some parents who were eligible for English instruction do value French and learning French and the French language very dearly, and they thought that by changing Bill 101, there might be a risk of losing the French language, which is not something that they want. So that's why the result is not 100%. In terms of Canadians who are ineligible, there is a distinction that needs to be made between the 2 variables of geography, so where they live in the province, because the answers were quite different depending on where they were physically. And let's look at these results a little closer. Hold on. Here we go. Okay, so a quote that could represent the ideas of parents who are ineligible, born in Canada, but living in the region, so in a region outside of the Montreal area, would be this one. So this father says, I am afraid we will lose our language. So there's this notion of fearfulness, of linguistic insecurity if we were to make some changes to Bill 101. And he says further down, I do not want to feel like a minority. Whereas parents living in the Montreal area answered in 100% of cases, yes, we would like to change Bill 101. These are parents that are in contact with they're in closer contact with people from other cultures, linguistic backgrounds. And this mother says, I find it unfortunate that we have 2 separate systems. She says, you are either eligible or not. We keep digging a trench between both cultures. Francophone and Anglophone children live in parallel. So it's important to understand that in Montreal, there could be 2 neighborhoods. One neighborhood is historically Anglophone and another neighborhood is multicultural or historically Francophone, and they are maybe separated by a street, but those make them 2 separate districts. And because children don't have an opportunity to go to school together, we come and create this kind of segregation, linguistic segregation within the city. And many ineligible parents thought that this was very unfortunate.
3 minutes. 3 minutes.
3 minutes, thank you. In terms of modernizing Bill 101, I asked the parents whether so the parents who said yes, I asked them, okay, how do you want to change it? Do you want to make it stronger? Would you make it weaker? So stronger, limit access to English school even more, or weaker, open access to English school? Let's see what some parents who represented their group said. So it's important to mention that none of the parents went for a stronger Bill 101, so further restrict access to English school in Quebec. So every parent who said, yes, I'd like to see it change, went in the direction of a weaker Bill 101. So this father at the top says bilingualism should not be seen as just a privilege, but a necessity. This mother from migrant background had wanted to convey ideas of, maintaining the mother tongue, so a language other than French and English. And the schools in Quebec right now legally cannot do that because they cannot, we cannot have subjects taught in another language than French. And then this mother at the bottom says bilingual education while protecting the French. So always this idea of plurilingualism and opening up the law and the policies for more languages. All right, so according to public policy theory, parents should be included in the decision-making process because they're stakeholders of the education system through their children. So are they being listened to? Well, a few weeks ago, the government of Quebec introduced a motion to amend Bill 101, which will now be called Bill 96. And opposite to what my participants shared during the focus groups, Bill 96 seeks to modify existing policies by strengthening them, so further restrict access to English education. I cannot say much more on this new policy because it's brand new and consultations will be held this fall in Quebec. But all I can say is that I eagerly await to see who will be invited to the discussion table. And this concludes my presentation. Merci beaucoup. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions?